Welcome to GoodChristadelphianTalks. I'm Levi.
And I'm Chris.
And I'm Brian. Thank you for joining us this week.
On this podcast, we select one talk a week to help us get the Bible in our daily newsfeed.
We post a new episode at the start of each week with a short intro beforehand to kind of set the stage for the talk you're about to listen to.
And now, let's talk more about this week's talk.
This week's talk is an exhortation by Brother Steve Cheetham, given in 2007 at the Hashawha Bible Camp here in the States. It's about Ahaz. I really enjoyed it. It's an interesting contrast that he makes, and he really does a really good job in the first half of the exhortation kind of coloring the Ahaz story and maybe presenting an explanation as to why it was that Ahaz did not trust in the Lord fully. And then that kind of becomes the point of the whole exhortation, that we kind of give part of our life, but not all, to the Lord. He has a quote in the talk that I really loved, that he said, "We sing the hymn, 'Take my life and let it be,' but we don't always want it consecrated or separated or given entirely to thee," he said. The talk, I guess, is a little bit of a kind of asceticism, stoicism, or maybe an eternal mindset, just recognizing that we really need to be applying eternity to all of our decisions and our thoughts and all the trials that come upon us. And recognizing, that we are on this, we're experiencing this life only for a small period while we wait for eternity. I really enjoyed this exhortation and really excited to share it. Thank you to Chris for digitizing this. This one was a tape that was sent to us, which was exciting. It's been really fun to kind of bring to life some of these talks that are not online, and we hope to be doing more of that in the future. But please do continue sending your suggestions. We get a couple suggestions a week, which is massively helpful. So if you hear a talk, please do send it to us. And if you're interested in recording an introduction for it yourself, we'd love to post, we'd love to involve more people in the introductions for the talks. So here is Steve Cheetham, exhortation, "We are the work of thine hand, Ahaz."
I have a theory about Ahaz. A theory is needed because it's inexplicable how he could be so callous towards God. Now, as your minds are all racing to remember who Ahaz, king of Judah, is, I'll give you a hint. He was the king to whom God gave that tremendous prophecy of Emmanuel as a sign. If you look at Matthew 1, verse 21, "And she shall bring forth a son, and thou shalt call his name Jesus, for he shall save his people from their sins. Now all this was done that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken of by the Lord, by the prophet, saying, Behold, a virgin shall be with child, and shall bring forth a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which being interpreted is God with us." So when you read that, think of Ahaz, king of Judah. And that prophecy was given to him as a sign. Ahaz was the father of Hezekiah. Obviously, he was from a good family. His father was a king named Jotham, and Jotham was a righteous man. Ahaz's grandfather was also a man of God for the most part. In fact, his grandmother also was from the priestly family of Zadok. And I'm not sure I said that right, but Ahaz was Hezekiah's father. So we kind of have the family lineage before us. So if you turn to 2 Chronicles 28, let's read the first few verses. Ahaz was 20 years old when he began to reign. He reigned 16 years in Jerusalem, but he did not that which was right in the sight of the Lord, like David his father. For he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel. He made also molten images for Baalim. Moreover, he burned incense in the valley of the son of Hinnom. He burnt his children in the fire, after the abominations of the heathen, whom the Lord had cast out before the children of Israel. He sacrificed also and burned incense in the high places, on the hills, and under every green tree. Why? Why would this boy do that? His father and grandfather were both, we would say, in the truth, both righteous men. Why would this son be so wicked and so callous? Now, my theory requires a few things to be seen from the perspective of Ahaz. First off, his grandfather was a good man. He was a good man who happened to be struck down by leprosy when he made a mistake. Remember, Uzziah went in to offer incense to the Lord, and the leprosy burst forth from his forehead, because only the priest could do that. And his grandfather suffered terribly from leprosy till he died. But from Ahaz's perspective, Grandpa was only trying to show his dedication to God. Grandpa was really trying to serve. And for serving God, Ahaz may have thought he was punished. Ahaz's father was a king named Jotham. Jotham died at the ripe old age of 41. And he didn't die in battle. It must have been a disease. It was something sudden. Perhaps his father Jotham had a heart attack. And he's described as a good man who feared God. And Ahaz would have thought, why did my father have to die? He was a good man. What is this God we're worshiping? There are also a few other things we should know about Ahaz. The record shows that Ahaz has nothing to do with God, period. Ahaz served, and remember this is Ahaz, king of Judah, he served every god but the one true God of Israel. If you're still in Chronicles, 2 Chronicles 28, verse 2. For he walked in the way of the kings of Israel. He made also molten images for Baalim. Moreover, he burned incense in the valley of the son of Hinnom. And we read this before. You see, he serves every god of all the nations round about, even some of the gods of the nations who dwelt in Canaan before Israel possessed it. If you look at verse 23 of the same chapter. For he sacrificed unto the gods of Damascus, which smote him. And he said, because the gods of the kings of Syria helped them, therefore I will sacrifice to them, that they may help me. But they were the ruin of him and of all Israel. And finally, the prophet who ministered to him was Micah. In Micah 6, verse 16, and I'll read it for you, Micah says this, for the statutes of Omri are kept, and all the works of the house of Ahab, and ye walk in their counsels, that I should make them a desolation, and the inhabitants thereof a hissing. Therefore ye shall bear the reproach of my people. But if you look in the margin, it says, he doth keep. It's not the people of Israel, but Micah is saying, he, Ahaz, doth keep all these wicked things. Another thing we need to know about Ahaz before we get into my theory, it's clear that God went out of his way to save the king. You read everything about Ahaz, king of Judah, and God is always trying to save him, always trying to warn this king, and he's actually really trying to preserve this king. But in the end of King Ahaz, king of Judah, this is the divine summary. And it's back again in 2 Chronicles 28, verse 22. At the time of his distress did he trespass yet the more against the Lord. This is that King Ahaz. You almost get a sense of exasperation from God that what else can I do for this man? Well, here's my theory. My theory is that Ahaz saw no benefit to serving God. From his perspective, it just seemed like only bad things happened to those who served Yahweh. His grandfather was struck with leprosy, his dad's untimely death. He would find, as he did in Damascus, a God who would help him, who would give him benefit, who would give him advantages. And so he sought all the gods around of the nations. He'd find a God more to his liking. Ahaz judged God very harshly, and you get the sense it's almost bitterly in the way he views Yahweh. And my theory is that because good things did not happen to God's servants, that Ahaz thought, well, there's no sense serving this God, because Ahaz did not believe. Was it right for Ahaz to expect only good things from God? You know, we just sung a hymn, and we tend to missing it because of the way that the verses are grouped together. As Robin just played for us beautifully, we tend to sing it like this: take my life and let it be. We don't realize it continues, consecrated, Lord, to thee. And it's almost as if we say, Lord, here I am, I'm yours. Now just keep it all nice and even, right? Let it be. Everything's good. And that's not what that hymn is about, as you realize. We sometimes get the idea that we're surrendering, but leave well enough alone. You know, only God knows why Jotham died so young, the father of Ahaz. But it was not Ahaz's prerogative to judge that, or to judge God by the untimely death of his father. If God took his father at 31, 41, or 101, that is God's right. Jotham and all believers, including us, are God's vessels. As we just read in Timothy, we have been sanctified by God. We have been consecrated for him to use as he sees fit. Jotham accepted this. Do you? Take my moments and my days. You know, in 1 Corinthians 6, verse 19, Paul writes this: 1 Corinthians 6, verse 19, what? Know ye not that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit, which is in you, which ye have of God, and ye are not your own? That's part of the deal. It's when we start thinking that we are our own to decide what should happen, then we get into trouble. When we think we know what's best, that's when problems come up. In Isaiah 64, I'll read it to you. Isaiah 64, verse 8, Isaiah, looking at the potter, says, but now, O Lord, thou art our Father. We are the clay, and thou our potter, and we all the work of thine hand. Or Paul in Ephesians 2, verse 5 says, for we are his workmanship. You know, there's at least two reasons why we receive trials. Maybe more, but there's two that are very obvious in Scripture. The one is to prove us, to teach us, to make us stronger. And we receive trials for that reason, and we should accept that. The one we have a harder time with, perhaps, is when we suffer things to teach others, to set an example. That something happens to me so you take stock of your life and see where you're headed. You know, Job suffered some pretty terrible things, and it was all because other people needed to be taught. He didn't understand why, but he accepted it. The Lord gave, the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the Lord, he says in Job 1:21. Or to his wife in Job 2, verse 10, shall we indeed accept good from God and not accept adversity? Think of Jeremiah the prophet. Jeremiah endured many adversities, and it culminated in his death. And all of that happened with the intent to teach others, to be a witness to others. He was imprisoned in a horrible pit. He was told to walk 1,200 miles and to bury a piece of clothing by the Euphrates River by foot. It seemed crazy to him, but he did it. Ezekiel, we're told, was made dumb. He was unable to speak. Another time, as a sign, he was told to lay on his side on the ground for over a year. Cook, prepare meals, do everything, laying on his left side. And when he was done, he was told to lay on his right side for 40 days. It seemed crazy, but he did it. God was using him. And we could fill the whole talk with just examples of where this has happened. God asked a lot of these believers, and they all accepted it. I doubt any of them understood it. They might have thought, well, maybe there's an easier way to make this point. Maybe instead of laying down for a year and a half, I can just teach in the synagogue. Yeah, but they didn't. They allowed God to use them as God saw fit. And you know, it wasn't unreasonable for God to ask that from his believer, from his chosen vessel. If you look at Hebrews 11, verse 33, Hebrews 11, verse 37. They were stoned, they were sawn asunder, were tempted, were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and in mountains, in dens and caves of the earth, because God asked them to. Now let's make it a little personal. Don't you think it's possible that God uses one of his disciples and allows them to suffer, perhaps an accident, a disease, because maybe that's the only way he can bring unity back to an ecclesia, that he can unite an ecclesia or individuals back in prayer and unity? Don't you think it's possible that the only way to shake up non-believers, to turn them to God, is maybe when a loved one is taken? I do. Would you give your life up if that's what it took for your family to come into the truth? Is it unreasonable for God to ask that of us? You know, I would hate to be so hardened to God, so callous to his angels working in my life, so disrespectful of the signs intended for me that at one time in my life God would say, "That Steve Cheetham," who ignores everything that God did to turn me around. That was Ahaz. We just sung, "Take my life and let it be consecrated, Lord, to thee." What saddens me is that Christianity out there teaches that if you serve God, you'll be materially blessed. Life will be easy. Life will be smooth. Just send your check in. Tell that to Jeremiah. Try to convince Ezekiel of that, or John the Baptist. Take my life means that we surrender fully to God, willingly, joyfully, like Paul and Silas in prison. That we accept that what happens to us is God's will, that God uses us as he sees fit, and we go with it. Let's get an example. John 9, verse 3. Here's a poor guy who was blind from birth. John 9, verse 1. And we're going to read verse 3. Jesus answered, "Neither hath this man sinned, nor his parents, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him." Now you put yourself in that blind man's shoes. His whole life was spent blind because God chose to use him at that moment in time to show the power of his Son. Paul had an affliction. We're not sure what it was, but it was there to keep Paul in the truth. God could have healed him. God saw it fit that Paul had that affliction because that's what kept him in the truth. We should not be serving God so we can be blessed in this life. In 1 Corinthians 3, Paul says in verse 16, "Know ye not that ye are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwelleth in you? If any man defile the temple of God, him shall God destroy. For the temple of God is holy, which temple ye are." We destroy this sanctified vessel of the Lord when we fill it with the flesh. Our duty is to bear God's name, to let God's character shine through this weak vessel you see before you. King Ahaz of Judah never reflected God's name. And in fact, he defiled God's temple, the place where God chose to put his name, and he filled it with idols. And finally, Ahaz, to make his point clear, he locks the doors of the temple once and for all. The one place on earth where God chose to put his name, and he locked the door. No one would enter that place. Look at Acts 9, verse 15. What does Paul say? Acts 9, verse 15. "But the Lord said unto me, Go thy way. For he," this is talking about Paul, "is a chosen vessel unto me, to bear my name before the Gentiles and kings and the children of Israel. For I will show him how great things he must suffer for my name's sake." Here Paul bears God's name to the Gentiles. He's called a chosen vessel. It was anything but easy. 2 Corinthians 4. Look at how he describes himself and his companions. He says, "We are troubled on every side. We're perplexed. We're persecuted. We're cast down. Always delivered to death." That was how God chose to use that vessel. Paul lived a hard life. Yet, in 2 Corinthians 4, verse 17, he goes on and says this. 2 Corinthians 4, 17, "For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, worketh for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. While we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal." No matter how bad things got for Paul, his hope was in God. His desires for the promises to be fulfilled is what kept him going, what gave him strength. Weymouth translates this verse, and I like the way he does it. Weymouth translates what Paul wrote this way: "Our light affliction and transitory burden of suffering is achieving for us a vastly preponderating and eternal weight of glory." I don't like preponderating, but I do like how he describes life as transitory, as a light affliction. It's temporal. It's very helpful when we view life, the problems we suffer, the burdens we carry, as transitory. God has said, all things God works for the good of those who love him and have been called according to his purpose. All things work for good. Do we believe that? It's easy to be faithful, isn't it, when things are going well, when things are smooth, when life is good? But really, it's only in trials and difficulties, in sadness, that our faith is really revealed. In 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 14. Second Chronicles 7, verse 14. If my people which are called by my name shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven, will forgive their sins, and heal their land. Solomon here is told of the great blessings that come to those who bear God's name. And they are, but not in this life. In Micah, back to the prophet of Ahaz, Micah 4, verse 5, and I'll read it for you. For all people will walk, every one in the name of his God, and will walk in the name of the Lord our God forever and ever. That may not mean a lot, but remember, Micah is the prophet to King Ahaz. And he shows the same hope and promise to the king. He says, Ahaz, if you walk in God's name, turn yourself along, things will be different. How important it is to walk in God's name, to bear his character, to reflect his glory. Life is transitory. This isn't our resting place. You know, and that lesson never sunk into Ahaz. Ahaz never, ever viewed himself as the servant, as the clay in God's hands. And you think of the irony of that. The king whom God revealed the Emmanuel prophecy, God's Son with us, the one who would be hailed, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. This king would reject God and refuse to bear the name of God till the bitter end. In the British Museum, there's a tablet describing the tribute received by the Assyrian king Tiglath-Pileser. And it's the tribute that this king received from all the nations round about. These would include nations like Edom and Moab, Ammon, and from Jehoahaz in Judah. That's right. God's name was associated with Ahaz. He was called Jehoahaz, Yahweh, as a prefix to his name. And you think how sad it is that because of his wickedness, because of his failure to seek God, Scripture never refers to him as Jehoahaz. God refuses to have his name associated with his king because of his wickedness. Come follow me, Jesus says to us. The road may not always be easy, but it's a road worth traveling. In the bread and the wine before us, let us see in these symbols the Son of Man who endured all, who gave all to save us. We'll end it with what Paul exhorted the Hebrews in Hebrews 12, verse 1. He says, therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us also lay aside every encumbrance, the sin which so easily entangled us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God.
Thank you for listening to the Good Christadelphian Talks podcast. We hope this talk helped you in your walk and brightened your day. If you would like to hear more, please subscribe for new episodes. We are on all major podcast platforms and also on YouTube. If you enjoyed this particular talk, please share it with someone else who you think might enjoy it too. For show notes on the talk you just listened to, visit our website at GoodChristadelphianTalks.com or check out the show notes section of your podcast player. Please share your thoughts on the talk from this week on our Facebook or Instagram pages where we are at Good Christadelphian Talks, or leave a comment on our YouTube channel where these talks are posted as well. If you enjoy listening to the talks that we post and hear one that you think we should share, please tell us about it. You can send us a suggestion using the Contact Us tab on our website or message us on any of our social media accounts. Thank you for listening. God bless, and talk to you next week.